Good day, good afternoon, good whatever time zone your mind, body, heart, soul finds itself in. Greetings to each of you, whether you're in this room or you're in this room and you're still somewhere else, and to all of your relations. There's a lot of words on the title for this session. I think we win for the most words per session title. And so before we get more into cognition, perhaps just take a moment for us to all just breathe together. Just feel yourself in the seat, if you're sitting or standing. Feel your feet on this earth, on this floor. Giving thanks for the tremendous gift of gravity that keeps us grounded, even when our minds may be floating. Yeah. And just have a moment to check in with how your body's feeling, where your attention is, whether there's an emotion that is stirred. And perhaps notice a place in your body that feels kind of open and spacious. And notice a place that may feel perhaps a little contracted. And then just spend a moment going between those two. We began this day today in a poetic, prayerful song. And I want to go back to the sensation, the memory, the invocation that was offered us to begin our time together today. Being with children, the future generations, those who've gone before, and bring us to this present moment. So in the way that often mothers take one more breath to stretch, to see if they can dig in, to be present and attune once more, I'm going to ask that of all of us, myself included, those of you who may be listening online and having Zoom fatigue, and all of us in the room. And perhaps all that's needed, and I'll offer a little bit more, we'll offer a little bit more, is a provocation towards what is it for philanthropy, wealth, monies, to move towards life-affirming systems, what we speak of in the language of post-capitalist realities. And while we're using this language of hacking narratives, what we're offering is a way to be with the deeper narrative structures that live within us, that live in our culture, that live in our institutions, that shape the way we perceive reality and what is possible and hinder what we see as possible. And we're going to offer some provocations about how and what we see might be some ways we could be in an ongoing, lived shifting of practice. So a lot of words. Today is a short time at the end of the day, so this is going to be what we would call like a homeopathic dose. This work and offering comes out of, there's books and videos and webinars and podcasts and white papers and issues, and there's a body. So if you don't get something, or you learn in another way, or you need to be with, many offerings, many ways. You can also come and tackle one of us with a hug, or not, or come and join us in days and days that we go through this, usually in about 7 to 10 days. So we don't want to rush, but we do want to provoke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also we have live questions here, so if you have anything, you can also share with us live.
Yeah. So by now you've probably determined that I'm someone called Lynn, and this is my co-conspirator, Felipe. And I want to honor the other person who's here with us, who's not in the room, but the ideation, my beloved brother, Alnor Lada. So, yeah. Okay. So, we're a group of sibling, we call ourselves projects or temporary organizational zones. We offer as long as it's of service. And the one I'm going to speak to today is called Transition Resource Circle. And I'm going to say this not to tell you who we are, but more to give the breadth of the inquiry that we sit with. And so the transition is, how do we move from the meta-crisis, how do we move from systems of domination and extraction towards systems that are more life-affirming? How do we move past narratives that are either apocalyptic in nature or savior? How do we find another way to be in response and responsibility to this moment that we all find ourselves in? Resources, we sit with, how do we alchemize and liberate capital, the broadest conception of wealth, which includes money, and gets out of our transactionalizing and commodifying capital again and again into ways we can put it in service of life. And how do we move from our notions of individual entitlement to collective entanglement? How do we move in circle ways that we recognize we need other ways of being and knowing to find our way in these times that we don't know the way? So I'm not going to go through this slide. What I will say is that dominant philanthropy, wealth, the usual ways that we think about and work with money are rooted deeply in the colonial, neoliberal, capitalist modernity project. There's been a lot of context setting today that has gone really deeply into this. You may have been present for that or not, but at this point, we all recognize that we are somehow inextricably linked to, if I could say it, like an anti-life machine. And I'm purposely saying machine and anti-life. There's myriad words. There is a lot of scholarship that tracks how deep these historical roots are from thousands of years to, I'm going to use neoliberalism because this is the latest chapter of what we could call capitalist modernity. And it's a recognition that the wealth, my dyslexic mind often says hoarded instead of held, but so wealth holders or wealth hoarders, it's on the backs of the human and more than humans who bear the brunt and the burden of ongoing systems of domination and exploitation. Philanthropy is both a beneficiary of the system and an example, and continues to uphold those logics. We are all complicit in this system to varying degrees. Some of you may be familiar with the concept of Wetiko, and or know this beautiful book of Wetiko that essentially tracks the condition of the Western mind, the Occidental often subscribed to white bodies that has this mind virus that is essentially this anti-life compulsion, I would say, and perhaps now almost an epigenetic addiction. And again, we're getting a homeopathic dose, so there could be a lot more to say about any of these one pieces. But it's to recognize, and I speak mind virus because these thought forms, these systems, they live within us. They live between us. They live in our culture. They live in our institutions. It is the background conditions, the waters we swim in, and the air that we breathe. So in this way, we are caught in beyond an ideology, almost a theology. And we call it often the unholy trinity of neoliberalism, which is kind of trapped in between a notion of separation, materialism, and rationalism. Of course, there are other pieces going on, but the dominant way that I, the mighty Oz sitting here on stage, is I perceive myself as a separate individual. I perceive material around me, the glass of water. I may even almost not even ever really perceive the water, but so thingify it that I just reach for it without being able to be in relationship with. We'll get to what we do with some of this, but I just wanted to set out some of the background conditions of where we are. So just take a breath. This is a Zapatista line that says, you can't solve money problems with money. So what do we do if we're kind of in this pyramid logic checkmate of late stage capitalism, neoliberalism that is hurling us into the meta crisis that is not something outside of us, but is in something in us that lives and breathes. And in a way, this anti-life machine almost has like a cyborg quality that continues to exist within us. What do we do? How shall we be? How shall we meet this moment? And those who are perhaps entrusted or still holding on to vast amounts of money and wealth, how do you respond to this moment with what your responsibility is in this very unique moment that we find ourselves in? We offer that perhaps we need to really get to the seed of ontology and shift from the logic of neoliberalism towards one that is post-capitalist. Just sit with that for a moment, and I'll say a little bit more about post-capitalism. This morning, the first session began with speaking about what it is to shift our gaze, to shift the way that we are, to connect back to the heart mind, and that may even be more important than what we do with the capital. Ontology comes from the philosophical looking into what is the reality, how we perceive reality itself. So back to that material separation and rational. Do I perceive reality? I perceive reality as a phenomena of form. Do I perceive, when we get into rationality, the only way to know, or the best way to know, is through a rational, hyper-separatist, like look at the relationship between part to part or part to whole? If I were to say to you, if you were to go out and stand by the water and listen what the water would say to do to your wealth, or how to be with your wealth, how does that question land in you? Who's listening to that question? Some of the essence of this gets at what we're grappling with when we say that what is needed is a just transition plus ontological shifts. And this is perhaps a way of meeting this moment. So I'm going to move us towards what I feel like this entire day and body of work seems to be dedicated to is transition pathways. We all recognize that something about whether it's dominant philanthropy, whether it's about the NGO industrial complex, whether it's about the financial advising, the impact investing, et cetera, there's some longing to transition from where we are now to somewhere. And some of us may have ideas about how to go about doing that, what is necessary. For us, when we invoke this notion of transition pathways, we see that it does really begin with ontology, that it begins with the way that we perceive reality itself and the beingness. And then we say that this is a work we must do, inner and outer, or you could say spiritual and political. Spiritual because we have lived in a world that has been an anti-life machine, that has dehumanized and thingified, that we have rendered that which is sacred somehow inert and dead. And we need to come back into a way that we can perceive again with other eyes. Many wisdom traditions weave together the spiritual and the political, this inner and this outer. And we use the word praxis not just because we're trying to theorize, but because we're recognizing that there's a particular condition we find ourselves in where the realm of ideation or symbology, or at this particular era where we are, I would say for some, the era of not enlightenment, but disembodiment. We need a way to move from how we're perceiving reality and to be with this and understand power, control, and the histories of oppression that have led us to this moment. So that begins in ontology. We need a spiritual, political, or inner and outer praxis. And we need to see ways that transition us towards life-affirming systems. We speak about post-capitalist realities in the ways that I've heard many speak here: the collective intelligence, the solidarity that comes through, the reciprocity, the interbeingness, the cooperation and compassion. And I will say a moment or just a few more words about post-capitalism. We're using this not to be the next ism that comes after where we are now. We're in a way trying to interrupt the linearity notions that has us marching forward with progress or marching forward to, say, perhaps nihilism or the apocalypse. We're trying to disrupt this linear notion of time. I also want to acknowledge that there are many peoples and nations all over this planet who in a way have gone through and have endured to live post-capitalist realities for hundreds of years since first contact with colonizers, conquistadores, and others. And so there are ways and places that these post-capitalist realities are existing right now, and some of those places are under war and siege right now. And these values and these ways of being continue. So this is the notion of transition pathway that we're invoking. We put together something that we call the 5-element mandala, and it's a coordinate of possible. It's a way of seeing what might be if you're putting the monies, if you're using capital to liberate capital, if you're putting monies in service of life, what might you do? How might you go about that? And what is the disruption that would have to be done to the Occidental mind-body complex to be in right relationship with how we go about that? I'm not going to go through the whole mandala today. I want to focus on the air for a moment, the earth, and the ether. So now we come back to hacking and narratives. So the air is at the top of the mandala. And I'm going to continue to just, in a way, we just kind of made these slides so you could have your eyes could have a place to rest or just follow the bouncing ball. So the air. This is, for us, the domain of the need to create new ancient emerging cultural contexts. This is in a recognition that there's a cliche we all know, which is that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And it seems that we're in a real crisis of the collective imaginary of what else could be. As I said, we're trying to disrupt the notion of just linearity of time. So it's not just to create the new culture. As one of our Lakota elder brothers says, anytime he hears the word new, he's like, smells like colonization is in there somewhere. So it's to be with centering other ways of knowing and being and moving from monoculture to polyculture, moving into relationality with humans and the more than humans in the web of life. It's the role of narrative practitioners and hackers and educators and artists and others who seem to be able to tap into the collective imaginary and vision that will allow other values and other cultures to start to arise, other memes other than the life-destroying or the savior memes that help us find our way. So in this spirit of air, we embarked with our sibling project, Culture Hack Labs. Have any of you heard of Culture Hack Labs? Yeah. So Culture Hack Labs as well. And there's a whole long white paper and videos and a whole thing that goes really deeply into this narrative research. And we wanted to look at what would a hack on philanthropy itself look like. And in a way, what we're doing is endeavoring to first identify some of what we call narrative communities. I'm not going to go into the whole report nor the methodology. That will have to, be elsewhere. But a narrative community is essentially if you can find a group with the methodology that you're listening to that is represented. And in this case, it was listening to philanthropy itself, and then tries to understand the deeper logic that this narrative community is speaking from. So our endeavor with looking at those narrative communities is to develop a new common sense meaning for wealth and the function, for meaning and function of philanthropy and wealth, and to move us from the dominant logics being ones of extraction and control towards liberation and regeneration. Again, there's an enormous body of work underneath what I'm giving you the homeopathic flavor and taste of today. And I just want to focus on a couple of narrative communities. So I didn't expect that you would take in those 6 at once, but the one that's kind of in the middle that I think maybe you can see has the letter C. This is the narrative community, one that's the conversation was the loudest in a way, meaning the most frequency, and it was the one around decolonizing philanthropy. And as we sat with this and sat with the deeper logics, and the methodology goes into semantics and linguistics and really looks at what is underneath discourse. And the reason that it's still on that quadrant underneath extraction and control is not because it's not asking for power and money to shift. It's that the deeper logics of capitalism itself, the deeper logics of the forms of philanthropy and NGO-itis, if I can say that, and a shift of ontology of wealth itself, it is still caught in some notions of extraction and control while trying to work on power redistribution. So where we're trying to see is where that arrow is going, towards the upper right, towards more liberatory and regenerative. So that little circle that's up there is one that is imagining a broader, richer notion of what wealth is itself, that is rooted in wealth beyond just the monies or wealth beyond just who is the winner takes all. That's wealth beyond just the zero-sum games. That's wealth beyond how far I can see based off of how much scarcity or fear might be running in me in any given moment. That's wealth that's felt within the interbeingness, within the relational, the solidarity, the earth under my feet, and the awareness of the earth under my feet. A whole other notion of wealth that in a way is looking beyond even our tiny little blip of time that we walk this planet, that asks for how are we stewarding the world's collective endowment, not for our own goods or who we can see, but this entrustment of the world's and collective endowment to be in right relationship with all of life. So in the hacking world, sounds a little like, what we're trying to do is expose these deeper logics that really drive us in how we perceive reality, and then how we make decisions, how we see the possibility of constraints, or the sets of what we perhaps find ourselves in ways of being and doing. And it's an acknowledgement that it's a cognitive development process that often will go through kind of resistance, might be the one before breakdown, which is part of breakdown, and a growing set of awareness and an integration. And I want to just say a moment here that I'm going to move on to the next element. And part of that is because my observations of working in and around philanthropy for some decades now is that philanthropy loves to change discourse. It loves to change language. It loves to be told what it's doing wrong. It loves to have another report written that tells it, kind of tries to map it out and this and that. But there seems to be some really deep resistance to changing culture, practice, like the deeper logics that are driving and constraining. And so right now we see a lot of attention towards narratives, and the concern I have is that it's the next bright, shiny thing under the communications and advocacy and policy. And it runs the risk of changing discourse, and that's it. And that change of discourse becomes the only thing that changes. And that is a greater and greater harm to peoples and bodies of water and trees and the winged ones and all the other that exist with us on this planet. So in that spirit, we keep going on the mandala. And we want to offer some reframes. And in this way, we're getting to the deeper logic that wealth itself, a broad notion, a broad conception of wealth itself, could be this transition pathway. So how do we transform the actual essence of wealth where it wants to flow? Right now it's very dammed up, and it's dammed up in a variety of different ways. You can reflect on your own dam. From bank account to ATM card to financial advisors to et cetera, et cetera. To put that money in service, that wealth, that broad notion of wealth, the relational tissue that's here in service to creating post-capitalist realities. I'm going to just kind of move beyond these things so we can get to some reflections. So if at the top of this area of the mandala is the air element, it's that realm of culture creation and narratives and art and other ways of knowing. This bottom of this mandala is very much rooted in form and in earth. And here we look at how do we create and support post-capitalist infrastructure. So it's using capital to liberate capital, to really seed strong, resilient, localized economies, community sovereignty, bioregional, that I have some beloved peoples who are on a panel right now speaking about. Alternative modalities for health, education, cultural sovereignty. To see flourishing ecosystems in place. And the way that we see that we move from with this air and this earth element, I think this morning we heard about phasal shifts. This axis is all about create and transform, which assumes there's something that's needed for this state change. So that was that center of that mandala, that ether, that place that says that to do this and to do that air and to do the earth, we have to actually find our way to be back in right relationship with life itself. So this is where we place on the mandala the element of ether. So I'm again going to go backwards and forwards here just for the sake of time. So ether is this notion of recultivating life force. It's navigating that we have a lot of trauma all over the planet, but it's not dealing with our trauma to have better citizens who are enslaved to modernity. It's not just dealing with trauma in a separatist psychological frame. It's acknowledging that we need to deal with trauma to get back in right relation for how the current of life can flow through us. I've often felt like in this body, I've had to do cement removal. It's almost like I need to get something and really like, what is that? What were we talking about? What's that thing called? The jackhammer. Something, and that's a little bit of a strong approach. But for some of us who have grown up in the house of modernity, all of us who've gone to school that continues to teach passivity of mind and body, sitting in these chairs, sitting with our arms closed, this is a somatic piece of what we have to deal with. And by the way, these devices are teaching our evolution to be even more convex, and we're losing peripheral vision, and we won't do the soma analysis of all of this, but we could. But this is what we're speaking to. This is the ether, this recultivation of life force is where we need to move, as some have said far better than I could, moving from cultures of trauma toward cultures of initiation. It's where we really need, in the Western tradition, this is an awkward word to use, but the mystery schools. We need to really cultivate and take seriously these other ways of being and knowing, and take so seriously that we laugh and we play and life streams in and through us again. I won't go into the depths of life force, but it is related to eros, and that means that it's related to where our sexual trauma, and I would say that we have deified money to such an extent that it has taken the place of that. And so that's why this is so central in this work of moving towards post-capitalist realities. So in this ether, if we take these broader notions of wealth, what we want to offer is a notion that wealth could be mycelium, that wealth could be composting hierarchies into rhizomes, that perhaps philanthropy and wealth could do ecosystem cultivation. And here, I want to just offer a couple of examples and uplift the work. There have been many today that you've heard who have been doing this kind of work. And here in the UK, there is Project Talawa. There is the work that Lynn Chase is endeavoring to do. There is a work that is happening in New Zealand with the peoples there who are going beyond the rights of nature to really look at sovereignty as well, that will happen whether the rule of law catches up with it or not. There are those in New Zealand who are also saying, okay, we need to look at the heat maps of ecological restoration, and then we need to go and pray and listen for where we're doing this work. There's other ways that are already existing that are putting these narratives, these memes, into service of life. And if you haven't heard today or be inspired, ask us or go and do your homework. There's my beloved sister, Danae Elder, who is working to put the lands and the waters around her ceremonial mountain back in service for the waters, for the plants, for the trees, for the peoples. Many of you know about the reparations movements and the land back movements, and what we're saying is this is here. And I also want to say that we're always trying to hold back until we see the form, but we are in a moment where forming is happening quicker than we can see it, and sometimes we have to perceive from backspace in some other way to sense that it is happening. So we've gone through the axis at a homeopathic dose. And I'm going to pause here and just see where you are, see if there's a question, if there's a sensation. If you're sitting next to someone, I'll just give you a moment to either say something or to move your body or to write something before we do this last piece? Y'all feel tired to me. Am I feeling that right? You might need to just stand up and shake a little. I call that shaking your synovial fluid. It's the jovial synovial. Yeah. So we're back to the ontological shifts. If we have the narratives that are more rooted in a richer notion of wealth that includes our epigenetic, ancestral, the relationality, the fecundity of how we experience daily life, how we experience our culture, how we experience one another. We recognize that right now, I feel for many of us, not for all of us, is that we're in kind of this rub right now. We're in the checkmate. We're in the inner capitalist that lives in and within all of us. And we're also in that something's opening to other possibilities. And I feel this rub. And some days I feel it like a friction and a headache. And some days I feel it like a fermentation. And some days I feel it like, I don't know, an awkward dance or a beat that's coming. But it's that interesting nexus and that practice that is needed, this ongoing shift that disrupts patterns and is in the side of the hospice while it's recognizing that something is like being birthed at the same time, but isn't rushing to that, because anybody who's given birth knows that the baby comes when the baby comes. And it's a lot of pain to get there. So before I offer just a couple of ways that we could be with ontological shifts, the questions to just be with in your soma, in your body, in your instrument, is with any of the words that I have said or what we will say, what images, sensations, thoughts do these concepts evoke? Where do you feel thought forms in your body? If that's too much and your cognition is loaded, or if you want one more that those two haven't landed, what does it require to keep your awareness on the practicing of other ways of being and knowing? While you're sitting in this room, while you're listening to my voice, what does it require? So notice that just by putting words on a slide, it already hits a certain reflexivity, a certain technology of mind. We're in the English language, we're in the thingifying language, we're in the hegemonic language, which I said the thingifying language because English, as y'all know, has a lot more nouns than verbs. Other languages have more verbs than nouns. Or verbene. It's an I. Many others are ing kind of languages. They're ever happening. And just perhaps listen or read or sense in yourself when I say attribution and competition. What sensations, thoughts, feelings in your body, images, practices. Where do you see yourself, your institutions? Which realms of your life feel like attribution? Like, I want to be seen and acknowledged for that. Or maybe you desperately need some water and you're noticing a long line and the water is going down and down and down and down. And do you take a breath or do you feel that urge to compete? And if I say service and solidarity, again, what thoughts, sensations, feelings, images. accumulation of, today we're talking about capital, so we'll say capital. Liberation of capital. Is there a sense in your body? Is there a sense in your entelechy, in some part of your being, of what liberation of capital? Maybe it may not be what it looks like, but what it might feel like, or what gets stirred up in you. I just got a lot of tingling in the floor of my feet, for example. What is it to be transactional? I need to meet him because he's going to give me the thing that I need. And I grabbed him, if y'all notice. And I thinged him. Transactional. Relational. Can I perceive that this water has been existing for illions? I say illions because my brain can't quite do millions, billions. And what that even is, to have existed on this planet for all of that time, and the memories and histories and movements. Can I perceive a web of relations just by the simple act, or perhaps offering, of picking up and sipping from a cup of water? And what is it to move from entitlement? What do we feel entitled to? Do we feel entitled to water? I'm in the UK, so I don't know how to say 2,000 calories a day here without being American. So whatever your equivalent of that would be. And what does that limit us to? There's a line in the book that says, you're entrusted with everything. We are entrusted with everything and entitled to nothing. How does that land in you? Do you feel resistance, acceptance? Are you numb? Could just be tired. So we put this on a continuum because we recognize these are not polarities. They're ways of practicing in an ever ongoing way, and these can be happening simultaneously within us. They can shift in a nanosecond and they can shift back. And that's just the rhythm that we're living right now. So with the last precious few minutes we have, you have pens and pads. You have someone who's sitting next to you. This is a choose your own adventure moment. And there's 3 questions here. And I would invite you to pick one. And whether you need to kind of write, or you might need to dance it. You might need to dance it with someone and speak it. Or maybe you just need to perceive one another without words right now. I just want to invite us all to find a question that feels alive for us right now. Where on the mandala might your work be? Is there a way of being or an approach that would serve transition and a transformation of wealth? Where might you be stuck? Or where is there something that you can sense changing? And this one might be the most grandiose and the most humble at the same time. To what could you, your organization, your monies, your life force dedicate? So we're going to give a few minutes to just be in that, and then we'll find a way to close. Maybe we'll close, we'll read some questions into the space, or if we were outside, I'd probably have us doing something as I don't know what, composting, rallying cry, stomping on the ground. But just be with these questions for a few moments. And in the interest of Chronos time and trusting Kairos time, I want to offer just 2 more ways to get to what one of my dear siblings calls as a clopening, a closing and an opening. So, as I said before, there's a larger body of work. There's a cadre of, I don't know what I could call mystical pirates, caravan of fools, dreamers and weavers and cosmologists and activists and funders and beyond, that we were really trying to nourish and seed this notion of cultures of transition, that we're all in a praxis together to find how to put capital, ourselves, our relations, all of our being in service of life and find our way together. It's a recognition that we as a species are at a very deep initiatory moment. And the only way we can really deeply accept and be with that is a very deep surrender. And perhaps we might find a way to walk each other into the unknown. And maybe that might be some other home that we've never quite known in this life. So if you want to join, there are, I have to give a shout out to my beloved sister, Alexa Garcia, Afro-Colombian artist who read the book and made beautiful images, and as did our brother Fede. And so the book has a lot of art. And in that spirit, we brought some copies of the book. They're somewhere at the front. We recently did a special issue of Cosmos Journal dedicated to healing wealth that's about philanthropy and a much broader notion of wealth. And we also did a special issue with our sibling Culture Hack Labs. It's about post-capitalist philanthropy and has videos and the white paper and the narrative report and webinars and other videos with Al Noor. There's a host of ways that if your way is to be with content, or your way is to be with content in various ways, or your way is to come to a gathering, or your way is to say, I'm in. Come find us. If you can't find us here, you'll find us somehow through, I think there's that old school thing called email. You can find it on the Transition Resource Circle. And just want to say deep gratitude to all who were here, whether in mind, body, heart, spirit, soul, to all your ancestors, to all your relations, to all what was said or not said, and that is unfinished within you. And that's it.
Thank you.